Good morning, this is Shelby Law with the Great Basin Fire Potential Briefing for Monday, September 28th, 2020. These significant fire potential impacts for the next 3 days are shown here. Really, we're just looking at the continuation of gusty winds and low relative humidities across the southern tip of the Great Basin. Elsewhere, things are quiet with no significant impacts from Tuesday, Wednesday, and into the foreseeable future, really. Smoke shown here for this morning and this afternoon at the near surface, looking for a pretty clear air day across the geographic area. That's at the same story for the upper levels here at 6,000 feet AGL, pretty clear for this morning and this afternoon. No precipitation or lightning for the last 24 hours. All of it was just right on the northern border. Fire activity is shown here. We did have some initial attack over far southern Utah with some larger fires down there with the wind and low relative humidities yesterday. And some of that wind will continue in today as well. The precipitation for the past 14 days is shown here, observed on the left and percent of average on the right. Still, with all these storms that have come through, they've really just kept their precipitation limited to the central Idaho mountains and a little bit there moving into eastern Idaho and northern Utah and central Nevada as well. But some very dry spots out there, especially central and southern portions of the area. ERCs have been on the downward trend across the north with this latest cool front, but still somewhat elevated values over Utah. We have seen cooler air move in, but relative humidities haven't rebounded that significantly, and certainly no precipitation to really drive those values downward. So a closer look at the northern Utah mountains. Those values are still very high for the time of year, near record levels. And across the Arizona Strip and the far southwest Utah, those values are above the records for the time of year and have been setting records for the last couple of months. So still very dry with elevated fire danger in those areas, and that's where we've seen the recent outbreak of large fire activity. This morning's satellite imagery is shown here. We can see that long wave trough that brought some precip to central Idaho and some wind to the Great Basin has moved off to the east, but we are still under the influence of those northerly winds in the eastern portions of the Great Basin, and that's what's going to enhance the winds across southern Utah today. Further west, the ridge begins to build in to the western U.S., and we'll see the warming and drying already moving into western Great Basin. So for this afternoon, we'll continue to see the ridge build in and will become the dominant feature for the remainder of the work week. But we will still see some of those lingering effects of that trough with the northerly winds. So we do have high risk issued for southern Utah and southern Nevada for those gusty winds associated with that trough as it moves out. So a closer look here at where we're expecting those gusty winds, mainly across eastern Nevada, western Utah, and even into southern and southeast Utah. Relative humidities are quite low over southern Nevada and southeast Utah. By Tuesday, the ridge really begins to move and expand a little bit further into the Great Basin, so we will see the winds die down as the ridge moves a little bit further overhead. Ground dryness levels returning to all of Utah and Nevada as temperatures begin to increase. On Tuesday, the winds will be fairly light region-wide with that ridge overhead. And low relative humidities, mainly in the single digits for most of Nevada and southern Utah, and a little bit higher over northern Utah and certainly higher over Idaho and western Wyoming. That's except for southwest Idaho, where those values are still fairly dry. On Wednesday, the pattern continues with the ridge in place over the Great Basin, warming and drying in place over the entire western U.S. We'll be back into the upper 70s by midweek across the southern valleys. On Wednesday, may see a slight increase in some of those winds over Utah. And it still remains dry air mass, especially over Utah and Nevada. Look at that 3-day precip. There is nothing expected in precipitation for the entire western U.S., but quite a bit over in the east. Ridge remains in place for Thursday. Got a bit of a broken record forecast going on. Lovely fall weather, warm, dry, sunny skies area-wide, light winds. That'll continue to Friday, although we will begin to see some changes start to move in, perhaps another long wave trough beginning to move into mainly the central U.S., but could clip the northern Rockies and bring in a little bit more moisture, maybe some gustier winds, but still staying dry and warm, particularly across the west, Nevada, and into central Utah. And then Saturday, it looks like that ridge just stays in place. So if there's any little shortwave troughs that try and come up around the ridge, it doesn't look like they're going to have any success. So still warm, sunny, and generally dry. And then that continues into Sunday. It does look like there's maybe another tropical storm developing off the Gulf here. We'll see what happens to this guy. 7-day accumulations are also 0 for the Great Basin. So it is going to be a very dry week coming up with warm temperatures, generally light winds, and sunny skies. The extended forecast doesn't change too much, so still keeping heat in place over the western U.S., especially over the Great Basin, with below normal chances for precip, particularly over the central U.S., but covering the Great Basin as well, going into October 5th through the 11th. And this concludes today's fire potential briefing. Please check back tomorrow for the latest updates.